City in the Sea, Part 5 and the Conclusion, Chapter 29. Visconti. Landing an hour later, after a hurried luncheon on board, and leaving Glastonbury to look after the ship, the adventurers made for the inn, engaged rooms, and then, under the guidance of Sam, turned in the direction of the Bournemouth Road, where Bowler's cottage was situated. Sam knew the place. He knew nearly everyone in Poole, and where they lived, and how. He knew that Bowler had paid for his cottage and for the one adjoining which he had bought last summer out of the profits of the herring fishery, and which he intended to furnish and let in the summer to come. "A lucky thing it's empty," said Sam, as he led the way. "Once we have the things here, it's only a question of a motor lorry to shift them when we know where Behrens wants them taken to. I'll get Taylor to bring his cart down to the quay at 4 o'clock to bring them up here." "Won't people suspect?" asked Marcia. "Lord, no. It's me, you see. Besides, there's nothing to suspect. It's only crockery-ware and curiosities we have brought from abroad. Joynson, he's the customs man, knows me, and I'll have a talk with him. Here we are." He stopped at a cottage on the right of the road. "Here's the place," said he. "Bowler's is just beyond. Wait, and I'll get the key from him." He went off and returned in a minute with the key, opened the door, and they went in. It was a 5-roomed cottage, counting the kitchen, clean and dry and empty of everything but a sack of potatoes reposing by the fireplace of the front room. Carrying the key with them, they went to the post office to send a wire to Behrens, announcing their safe arrival. Then they returned to the inn. Entering, they almost ran into the arms of a tall, black-bearded man who was coming out, his hat on the back of his head and a cigarette between his lips. It was Visconti. Sam recognized him at once and whispered the name to the others. The inn coming crashing down before their eyes, or even on the top of their heads, would scarcely have surprised them more. And it was a double surprise, for Visconti did not try to avoid them, did not seem startled. He recognized Sam with a smile that had something of mockery in it, raised his hat to the girl, and passed out without a word and with the cigarette still between his lips. "Well, I'm dashed," said Sam. Marcia, who had only seen Visconti through the glass at Hyalos, turned to Sam. "You are sure it's he?" she asked. "Yes," said Sam. She turned to the office, behind the window of which the manageress of the inn was seated, doing accounts. "Is that tall gentleman who has just gone out staying here?" she asked. "Yes," replied the manageress. "He has been here some days. May I ask his name?" "He is Mr. Visconti." Marcia thanked the woman and, turning to her companions, led the way into the coffee room, which was empty. Chapter 30. Cornered. A bright fire was burning in the grate. Without a word, she drew a chair towards it and sat down, whilst Bobby and Sam took their seats, one at the side of the table, the other on the couch by the door. For half a minute none of them spoke. It was Marcia who broke the silence. "He has been here waiting for us," said she. Then turning to Sam, "You must have told him that the boat came from Poole." "I don't blame you. It was just the thing one might say in conversation, and you did not know he was a rogue." "I blame myself," said Sam. "No, I didn't know he was a rogue, but I shouldn't have had all that champagne and stuff. I've let you two down. Well, there it is." He crossed his arms. "Yes," replied Marcia. "There it is, and there's no use crying over spilt milk. The question is, what are we to do? I don't like the thing at all. He comes here to wait for us, conceals nothing, not even his name, and meets us like that with a smile, knowing quite well that we know all about his hand in the Genoa business. You remember Pirelli's warning to beware of what he might do. I feel that he is a terribly dangerous man and a terribly clever one. I would much rather he had concealed himself and tried to steal the things from us by a trick, as he did at Genoa." Sam uncrossed his arms and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Bobby rose and came to the fire, leaning on the mantelpiece. "You're right," he said. "He must have something up his sleeve, or he wouldn't be acting openly as he is." "He has nothing up his sleeve," said Sam. talking as though he were addressing the pattern on the carpet. "It's just this. We can't fight him, and he knows it. Our business is shady. That's his strength." "But why didn't he speak to us?" "I don't know. We've got to wait and see. We'll leave the first move to him, and I'll go on getting the stuff on shore. I'm not going to be stopped by him, or show that we are a bit afraid." "All the same," said Bobby, "if we bring any of the stuff on shore tonight, I'll sleep in the cottage with it." "Yes," said Sam. "Either you or I will keep watch, and we'll have news from Behrens in the morning what to do about it. You'd better drop him a note this evening giving him details." At 4 o'clock, Bowler turning up, they put off to the Lorna. Sam had obtained hampers for the packing of the vases. This work and the transportation of the things to the cottage took them until 8 o'clock, when they returned to the inn for supper, leaving Bowler on guard at the cottage. Glastonbury had consented to stay on board the ship for the night as watchman. There was no sign of Visconti at the inn. They found from the waiter that he had dined at 6 o'clock and gone to Bournemouth to the theatre. It was an unfortunate day for the expedition, and a still more unfortunate day for Bobby. At 9 o'clock, leaving the others in the coffee room, he went out to smoke a pipe, taking his way along the quays by the light of a nearly full moon. Away across the harbour water he could see the anchor light of the Lorna Doone, and beyond her the ghostly silhouette of the Sandfly at her moorings. But he was thinking neither of ships nor of the expedition just completed, nor of the beauty of the cold, clear winter's night. He was thinking of Marcia. He was free now, free to say to her what he wanted to say, to tell her what she must have guessed by this, that she was the only woman in the world so far as he was concerned. She had never given him what one might call encouragement. They had been shipmates and friends, that was all. But he knew, or fancied he knew, that all would be right. The only thing holding him back was his position. If things turned out well, if Behrens were able to dispose of the marbles taken from Hyalos, his worldly position would be assured. They were worth a very large sum, perhaps £50,000, perhaps more. The energy and activity of Visconti in the matter was a guarantee of their worth, and he, Bobby, was to receive half the profits. Sam had always definitely refused to share, though, when it came to the point, Bobby had determined to make him share. Leaving that aside, if things went well, Bobby would be well off. If they went the other way, he would be as poor as when they started. He was not the man to ask a woman to share his poverty. Number. He could say nothing to Marcia till the money was secure, and that could not be till Visconti was defeated in whatever plans he had made against them, and until Behrens had written his cheque and the cheque was cashed. He turned from the end of the wharf into a mean street that led him by big warehouses to a path that opened onto the Bournemouth road. Poole, that once prosperous shipping port, is, especially on a winter's night like this, a town of the dead. Not a soul did he meet on his way, and the road beneath the moon showed nothing but a light from Bowler's cottage, and as he drew closer, Bowler himself smoking a pipe on guard outside. He gave the old sailor good night, and returning to the inn, knocked his pipe out in the porch. He felt suddenly easy in his mind. The deserted town, the fact that Bowler was on guard at the cottage, and that Glastonbury was taking charge of the Lorna, conspired to create this feeling. All would be well. There was nothing to fear. This was England, not Italy, and Visconti, whatever he might attempt, would fail. As he came into the lighted hall, his spirits had risen to the point of exultation. He was fey. He put his hat on the rack and came towards the coffee room. Now, the coffee room of the Anchor is situated at the end of a short passage floored with thick matting that takes a footstep without a sound. The coffee room door was a bit open, and as he reached it, a voice broken made him pause. Sam's voice, broken with emotion. "I swear to you, Marcia, I will never commit that foolishness again. Never again. I have done with drink of any sort forever, if you will only believe me." And Marcia's voice, "I believe you, and I will trust you. I would have said nothing about it, only that marriage is a thing more serious even than life. It is the lives of two people for always and always." Then a sound as though Sam was snivelling and the girl comforting him. Bobby turned and stole away. He came into the hall and went to the hat rack, put on his hat, absolutely unconscious of what he was doing, stood for a moment as if undecided, and then stumbled up the stairs to his bedroom. So that was it. Marcia was engaged to Sam. Not only in love with him, evidently, but engaged to him. He walked the room with his hat still on his head, recognizing the plain fact yet unable to accommodate his mind to it. Then slowly, and little by little, the monstrousness of the whole business began to piece itself together like the picture that makes a jigsaw puzzle. This pair had never shown the least sign of mutual attachment from start to finish of the voyage, if Sam's lapses from sobriety were left out of count. Then immediately after landing, they were carrying on like this. At the beginning of things, when they had first met, it was evident that they had known each other before, but they had said not one word of recognition. He remembered how Sam had shaved off his beard when he had heard that Marcia was joining them. Bobby, trying to think, sat down on the side of his bed and took off his hat, flung it in a corner of the room, and nursed his knee. From the very first there had been a mystery in their relationship, yet the solution of that mystery, mutual love masked and hidden, was antagonistic to all he knew about them and their relationship on the voyage. Yet there was no way of refusing it. "I believe you and I will trust you." I would have said nothing about it, only that marriage is a thing more serious even than life. When a girl talks like that to a man and comforts him when he snivels, what more is to be said? Well, there was one good thing, anyhow. Now that he knew how things lay, he was saved from making a fool of himself by asking Marcia to marry him. This thought, however, brought little comfort. The iron had literally entered his soul. He had not known the intensity and power of his love for this girl till now that it had been stricken down, a thing ruined yet living still. Ruined yet living still. He rose and opened the window and looked into the night, telling himself that whatever happened in the future, nothing mattered now. Chapter 31. Bearings. If the body had not the power to accommodate itself to injuries, and the mind to disasters and the tricks of fate, the world would be depopulated in 100 years or inhabited only by cripples. Bobby awoke next morning feeling as a man might feel who has suddenly lost a limb, but determined all the same to carry on, keep a stiff upper lip, and say nothing. All the same, he avoided the others, going without breakfast and turning up only when the work began, at 10 o'clock. Sam and Marcia found him waiting on the quay by the boat slip. Sam looked at him curiously. "Where on earth have you been?" he asked. "We waited breakfast nearly a quarter of an hour for you." "I had a beastly headache," said Bobby, "and went for a walk. Have you seen anything of Visconti?" "Not a sign," replied the other. "But he's in the hotel. I asked the maid, and she told me he came back late last night from Bournemouth and was breakfasting in his own room. Then half an hour later, just as we were coming down here, I got this from him. Read it." He handed a sheet of letter paper to Bobby, who read, "Mr. Visconti would be glad of an interview with Captain Hackett and his companions. Would 12 o'clock, here in Mr. Visconti's sitting room, suit Captain Hackett? A verbal reply will suffice." "What did you say?" asked Bobby. "I said yes." "You were right. It's better to see the bounder and have it out with him. Anyhow, we've forced him to make the first move. There's been no letter or wire from Behrens yet." "None," said Sam. "I think it highly probable old man Behrens will bundle into the train and come down himself instead of writing. I wish he were here now, that we might consult him." Marcia, who had taken her seat on a bollard, looked up. "I wonder would it be any use sending a telegram to Mr. Behrens to come at once," said she, "and putting off the interview with Visconti till the evening." "No," said Sam, after a moment's thought. "I don't like putting him off. I've a feeling we ought to get to grips with him at once. Besides, it would be a sign of weakness. What could Behrens do anyway? No, we've got to fight this thing ourselves. Anyhow, there's a chance that Behrens may turn up before 12. He got our wire yesterday, and he hasn't answered it." He looked at his watch. "Confound Bowler. Why hasn't he turned up? It's gone 10. "Let's go and fetch him," said Bobby. They left the quay and came by the side lane onto the Bournemouth road, where they found Bowler, who had just left his cottage. As they met him, a taxicab coming from Bournemouth drew up. The door flung open, and out bundled a little old man with a brown bag in his hand. It was Behrens. His keen eyes had spotted the group in the road and recognized Bobby and the girl. "It's Mr. Behrens!" cried Marcia, moving towards him. "Oh, how fortunate!" "I got the early train. It didn't come farther than Bournemouth, so I had to take a cab," said the old fellow, giving his bag to Bobby and feeling in his pocket for the money to pay the taxi man. "There's your fare and sixpence over. No, I'll walk to the inn, wherever it is. And now let's look at you," said he, holding Marcia a bit away from him. "Knew I was right. You're a different person. Nothing like a sea voyage, after all. Different person. Brought any things?" "Heaps," cut in Bobby. "We've got some of the stuff ashore, vases mostly, but the best of them are still on board the ship." "Then let's go to the ship and look at them," said Behrens. "But don't you want some breakfast?" asked the girl. "Breakfasted on the train," replied the art dealer. "And what do you call the best of them?" "Marbles," said Bobby. "I think you'll be pleased when you see them. I couldn't say much in my letter from Genoa, but you'll see." They reached the quay, where the boat was tied up to the steps, and rowed by Bowler, they put off for the Lorna. Behrens said nothing on the way across. The consuming passion of his life had him in its grip. Marbles. What might not that word, so capable of magic interpretation, mean now? Marbles from the mystic city of Hyalos. Marbles perhaps from the chisel of Praxiteles. He scrambled on board, nearly losing his hat as he did so, but still dumb. Still voiceless, he followed them below, and mute as a fish he stood while in the after cabin. Marcia gently removed the bunk coverlet from the smiling Aphrodite, the far-gazing, beautiful figure, on the face of which seemed to lie like a veil the sunlight of the golden age. Breathing deeply and swallowing hard, Behrens helped the others to raise her and rest her standing against the bunk edge, and then, and only then, drawing back and folding his hands, he found voice, murmuring to himself, talking in his beard, lost to everything but the vision before him. "You are pleased?" asked Marcia. "There is none other like her," said Behrens, speaking like a man in a dream. "Beside her, the Milo is a woman." Then, with one long, last look, he turned and went into the main cabin, followed by the others, who led him to where the rest of the marbles waited inspection. A quarter of an hour later, a businessman again and seated at the cabin table, Behrens, a cigarette between his lips, was being introduced to the skeleton in the cupboard of the expedition. That is to say, the subject of Visconti. It was Sam who did the talking, hiding nothing, and the art dealer, whose life had been spent in a struggle with rogues and scoundrels, sat listening to the recital, apparently unmoved, with scarcely a question. But Marcia noticed something in his face that she had never seen before, something grim, almost repellent, something that seemed to alter the color of his eyes, maybe by broadening the pupils. This was a new Behrens, different from the kindly and almost fatherly individual she had known from childhood. She had never seen Behrens in one of his great auction fights, fronting the hounds of the art-dealing world. She had never seen him up a tree with an old missal or a Benvenuto Cellini vase under his arm, and the wolves of the trade leaping for him with their bids, he always climbing higher. She had never seen him, in fact, with his teeth bared for fight and the ugly part of his nature in command. "And this gentleman," said Behrens, "is now at the inn, waiting to receive you and blackmail you at 12 o'clock. "That's about the size of it," said Sam. "And he offered, through this man Pirelli, to say nothing if you would hand him over the Aphrodite." "Yes?" Said Behrens, and relapsed into thought. "All the same," put in Bobby, "I don't believe he can do anything." "I beg your pardon," said Behrens. "How do you mean?" "I don't believe he can hurt us if we tell him frankly to go to the devil." "He has gone there long ago," said Behrens, "and you are mistaken. He can cause trouble. Now this is how we are placed. It is not a question of money for me. You have recovered these things for me, and on the information given to you by me, and I have financed the expedition. I intend to pay you, Mr. Lestrange, one half of what I consider to be their value. I had intended selling these things at a profit, but now that I have seen them, all that is gone. I will never sell these things. They are so lovely that they are part of my life. At my death, they will go to the world with the story of how they were obtained, giving none of your names, just saying where and how I got them. It will be the fitting postscript to the life of an art dealer who loved art more than money. There will be much talk, much fighting over these things when I am dead. The Greek government will have its say, the English government too. But they, the lovely things, will remain, whatever government gets them, with my name attached to them forever. That will be my little monument, erected not to me so much as to the fact that I salved these things from the sea and gave them to the world. Now, if you had brought home inconsiderable things, even though valuable, I would say to Mr. Visconti, "Dog, take your bone and be silent." But the case is different. I must deal differently with Mr. Visconti. He asked you to be with him at 12 o'clock. Well, you must send your man now to the inn and ask him to be with you at 12 o'clock. Tell him to come here to this ship, interview him in this cabin, and I will be in that little cabin with the door half shut. I will hear what he has to say, and leave the rest to me. I believe I will be able to say a word after I hear what line he is talking. I was not born yesterday, Mr. Lestrange, and my life has been spent very much in a continual struggle with rogues. "Will he come?" said Sam. "You must send and tell him to come," replied Behrens. "I would not write. Just send your man with the word." "He'll come all right," said Bobby. "He's cool enough to do anything. Tell Bowler to say you are sorry you can't go to the inn, as you were busy, but that you will be glad if he'll come to the ship. He knows most of our men are on shore, so he'll not fear us kidnapping him or anything like that. He'll come right enough." Sam went on deck and gave the message to Bowler, who took it ashore. Then, between them, they lifted the Aphrodite back into the bunk and covered her with the quilt. 10 minutes later, Marcia, who had gone on deck to prospect, came down with the news that Visconti had evidently accepted the invitation as he was coming down the quay to the boat. "And now," said Behrens, "not a word as to me. I will just listen to this gentleman who is coming off so boldly, thinking that the trump cards are his. Well, well, we shall see." He went into the after cabin and half closed the door. Chapter 32. A Great Art Dealer. Visconti, as he came on board, found Bobby waiting to receive him. "I have come," said Visconti. "I know," cut in Bobby. "You have come to see Mr. Hackett. Follow me, please." He led the way down to the cabin, where Marcia was sitting on the couch and Sam standing by the table. Sam nodded curtly to the visitor and pointed to a seat. Marcia did not even incline her head. She sat looking at this man who had been pursuing them for so many weeks, looking at him and wondering, for Visconti seemed completely and entirely at his ease, and as he sat down and placed his hat on the floor beside him, might have been a friend, or at all events some visitor paying a friendly call. It was Sam who opened the business. "I didn't see you at Genoa," said Sam, "but I saw your agent, Pirelli. I dare say he told you what I said about you. Well, what's your business?" "Quite simple, Captain," replied Visconti. "It has to do with your cargo. One word. You feel aggrieved that, coming to Hylos, as I did with an expedition costing much money, only to find that you had forestalled me. You feel aggrieved, I say, that this being so, I have done what I have done. Well, I will explain. You never can explain away the fact that you asked me to dinner to pump me of information," replied Sam. "There is a lady present, so I can't tell you in plain English what I think of that business. However, go on." "I will go on," replied the other, quite unmoved. "I make no apologies. Business is business, and in this world, Captain, there is no such thing as friendship in business. There's honor." "Perhaps," replied Visconti, "but we will not talk of honor in a question that has to do with stolen antiques." "Stolen!" cried Sam. "Shut up, Sam," cut in Bobby. "Don't lose your temper. Yes, Mr. Visconti, go on. Stolen antiques, you were saying." Precisely, replied Visconti. Stolen antiques. Though, believe me, I do not wish to press that point on you more than just to touch you with it. Like the point of a dagger, said Bobby, with a threat that the dagger will be driven home if we don't consent to share the swag. The illustration is highly coloured, but not without verisimilitude. Visconti smiled. Now let us talk like reasonable men. Stolen is a nasty word. I do not believe that either of you gentlemen would consent to theft in the ordinary acceptation of the word. Nor would I. But you have done what I would have done had I been able. You have taken from the sea those things that belong to no man, but to which a certain government might lay claim. No government could claim them, said Sam, any more than they could claim the fish swimming in Hyalos Bay. These things belonged only to the men who owned them, and they've been dead 2,000 years. No doubt, said Visconti. But all the same, and you know it quite well, Captain, if I were to give this information, an embargo would be laid on these things pending inquiry and the decision of the courts. The law would take them into its hand, and years would be spent in litigation. You would win your case, perhaps, but you would be ruined with the expenses. That is so, Captain. I ask for a just share. My expedition, which was frustrated, cost me much. £4,000 would not cover all, including Mr. Pirelli's charges. I am content with a small share in return for saying nothing. I ask only for the Aphrodite which you showed to Mr. Pirelli. She will suffice me. And if we don't consent? Then, said Visconti, I will speak. This is no vain threat, Captain. I will speak, and that immediately. Tell the whole thing to the authorities. Yes. And what will they say? They will ask you what you were doing at Hyalos. You can't lie, for you hired those sponge fishermen from Aegina to help you. I will say I was looking for a new ground for sponge fishing, replied Visconti, without turning a hair. Don't be deceived, Captain. I can answer all inquiries. Well, what shall we say? Will it be silence and safety for you, or speech? You know me, and you know enough of me by now to realize that, being set on this matter, I will have no compunction. It is a gambling game, and if I don't have a share of the pool, I will have what the gamblers call, revenge. Sam looked at Bobby. He knew this scamp was speaking the truth, and that he would, if balked, do as he said. He wished that Behrens would take a hand in the business, and he cast a sidelong glance at the door of the after cabin. But the door was still half closed, and the concealed listener showed no sign. It was Marcia who spoke next. "May I ask one thing?" said she. "How did you know of Hyalos?" "That, mademoiselle, is my secret," replied Visconti. "And, quite honestly, the question has often occurred to me. How did you know of Hyalos? How was it that our two expeditions coincided?" As if in answer to this question, the door of the after cabin suddenly opened and Behrens stood before them. "Good day, Visconti," said Behrens. Visconti, who had been sitting with his back half turned to the door, rose and stared at the apparition that had suddenly materialized. Marcia, watching, saw him draw back slightly with the movement of the animal about to attack or be attacked. Instantly she knew that he feared Behrens, and from then on she watched the proceedings breathlessly and with the interest that drama only can give to the gazer. "Good day, Visconti," said Behrens, advancing from the door. "Pray take a seat. This, Mr. Lestrange, is my foreign agent and half-partner, Gabriel Visconti, to whom, the day before I spoke of the matter to you, I entrusted the secret of Hyalos, asking him to take the matter up and work it for me on a half-share basis. He turned the matter down, said he did not believe there was anything to it, doubted the legality of it if there was. He turned the matter down as far as I was concerned. He wanted it all for himself. He left England and fitted out his own expedition, not knowing that I had secured you, Mr. Lestrange, and that I was fitting out an expedition myself. Silence, Visconti. Let me finish speaking. He met you at Hyalos, found you had forestalled him, and pursued you here, where he meets old Behrens, the man who has always befriended him and whom he betrayed. It is very funny." Bobby heaved a deep sigh. All at once he remembered where he had heard Visconti's name before. The thing had worried him for weeks, but it was clear now. It was in Museum Street, on the evening when he had called to see Behrens, who had come to his front door to let out a visitor. He saw in a flash of memory the tall figure of a man departing in the lamplight, and he heard again Behrens' voice. "Good night, Visconti." Everything was clear now, including the fact that the meeting of the two expeditions was no fortuitous happening. Meanwhile, Behrens had taken his seat at the table almost opposite to his antagonist, who was still standing despite the invitation to be seated. "Well," said Behrens, "what have you to say?" "Only this," replied the other, who, having recovered from the shock of the meeting, seemed quite himself again. "How do you know that in this matter I was not working for you as well as myself?" Behrens laughed. "All I can say," he replied, "is that you have been working in a queer way. You said to me, 'There is nothing in this affair. It would not pay to go into it. The sea has eaten these things long ago.' Then you go off. Not a word from you. And the next I hear is that you have been into this affair up to the ears." "A man may change his mind," said Visconti. "In fact, that is what I did. On second thoughts, I changed my mind. I said to myself, well, let us see. It is a gamble with nearly all the numbers zeros, yet there is a chance." "Why then, did you not write to me and say that you were taking the chance?" "A man may be too proud to acknowledge an alteration of mind," said Visconti, and Behrens laughed again. Marcia, who was watching and listening intently, noticed to her surprise that the tone of the discussion between the two art dealers was taking a more amicable trend. The anger and irritation had gone from Behrens' voice and manner, though she saw at once that he did not believe a word the other was saying. As for Visconti, he was quite affable and calm. She did not know that Visconti was Behrens' right-hand man in continental affairs, and that Behrens was an absolutely indispensable factor in the business life of Visconti, that they were a sort of Siamese twins. She could not appreciate the fact that though Behrens was an honest man as men go, roguery in the domain of art dealing was to him a lesser thing than roguery in ordinary life. He had always found Visconti honest in money matters, but this was not so much a money matter as an art deal. The temptation had been too strong for Visconti to let run straight. It was a terrible temptation. All this was evidently present now in the mind of Behrens, inclining him to make allowances. Besides that, he did not want to break with the other. He was too valuable. "If you say that you went into this matter on my account as well as your own," said Behrens, "I cannot say that is not so, but I can say this. Going into it as you did, without my knowledge or consent, leaves me in this position. I am quite outside your deal, which was undertaken on your own account, and I am not responsible for any of the money you spent. On the other hand, you are quite outside my deal, and are not responsible for any of the money I have spent. Also, you do not share in the profits. Yet I am not hard, and I will make you a concession." Visconti leaned slightly forward. "Another man," went on Behrens, "might say to you that your story is open to a shade of doubt, and that doubt between principal and agent is so undesirable that business relationship must be suspended. But I am not an ordinary man. I am Jacob Behrens. I am worth to you many £1,000 a year. You are useful to me. And I say to you, Gabriel Visconti, that I will forget your story. I will not dismiss you as my agent. I will say nothing as long as you run straight. But should you breathe one word of this matter, either through negligence or malice, I will dismiss you as my agent, and I will crush you, Gabriel Visconti, like that." The terrible old man jabbed his thumb on the table as though he were crushing a fly. "I will say nothing," said Visconti, and he meant it. "One moment more," went on the other. "You do not know Jacob Behrens. Know him now. These things that have come into my possession I hold in trust for the world and for Greece, if she chooses to claim them. After my death all this will be known. Not one penny will I make from them. That is all I wish to say." Visconti sighed. He was beaten, utterly beaten. Yet he had got off lightly. If Behrens had broken off business relationship with him, it would have been ruin, or nearly as bad. "I will say nothing," he repeated, "only this. This gentleman, indicating Sam, gave me to understand that he had taken everything of value from the bay at Hyalos. May there not be something left, some little statue, something worth another search? There may, said Behrens. In fact, there is, but nothing more must be taken. The tomb is sealed, unless it be my will that after my death the matter of Hyalos is made known as part of my gift to the world with these marbles. Visconti sighed again. He knew at once that all was over, that he was up against something harder than granite, the will of Behrens. Behrens, who desired a monument to his name, and who had chosen to erect it not only from the fragments of art salved from Hyalos, but from Hyalos itself. Then suddenly Behrens broke out, "I will not have the world flooded with these things. Beware, Visconti." "Be assured," said the other. "I will say nothing. Well, I will not stay longer. I will call upon you in London on ordinary business in a day or so, and we are to consider this incident closed?" "Yes." Visconti bowed to Marcia. "We have had a keen fight, and I am beaten, Captain," said he, turning to Sam. "But I bear you no grudge." He bowed to Bobby. Then, hat in hand, he left the saloon and reached the deck. The others came up to see him off. "There goes a great rogue," said Sam, as they watched the boat reach the steps of the quay and Visconti stepping off. "No, Captain," said old Behrens. "Only a great art dealer." Chapter 33. London. They went below, and Behrens put on his spectacles and opened an account book. Seated at the cabin table, and seemingly dismissing the marbles, Visconti, and everything else from his mind, this extraordinary man began to go into the accounts of the voyage with Bobby, the payment for this and that, the crew's wages, provisions bought in Genoa, harbour dues, everything. It took half an hour, and then, leaving the Lorna, they went to the inn for luncheon. Visconti had already departed for town, so they had the place to themselves. When luncheon was over, they went to the cottage to inspect the vases, Behrens nearly weeping at the rough packing around them and at the thought of what might have happened to them. "It was Providence," said he. "You did your best. You did well. But how were you to know? No one but an expert should touch such things. I will telegraph now for my man, Fernandez, to come, bringing with him a lorry. I take charge of everything now, Mr. Lestrange, and all responsibility. When I have weighed up matters, you shall receive your cheque, which you will doubtless divide with your friends." "Not with me," said Marcia. "I have done nothing." "Nor with me," said Sam. "I went for the cruise. I said so at first. I have had the fun of the thing, and that's all I want." Now Behrens could understand all sorts and conditions of men, but he could not understand a small yachtsman of the type of Hackett. He thought he was mad in a mild sort of way, and he as much as said so. "I don't want money," said Sam, "but I tell you what I will do. I'll buy the Lorna from you if you'll let me have her cheap." "That," said Behrens, "you must settle with Mr. Lestrange. He will act for me in selling the ship. I know nothing of ship matters." They returned to the inn, Sam short in his manner and feeling rather snubbed. He could no more understand the art dealer than the art dealer could understand him, or the fact that the Lorna was more to Samuel Hackett than all the treasures of Hyalos. Marcia was silent and Bobby gloomy. It was only now that the tension of the struggle with Visconti was relaxed that Bobby came under the blighting sense that Marcia was lost to him, that she was Sam's, and that the biggest cheque that Behrens could pay him would fail to bring him happiness. It was past 3 o'clock when they reached the inn. "I shall go up to town by the 5 o'clock train," said Bobby. "There's nothing more to be done here, and I wired yesterday to my landlady that I would be back today or tomorrow." "I'll go with you," said Marcia. "There's nothing I can do, and Mother is expecting me. Are you staying?" turning to Sam. "Yes," he replied. "I'll see you in town, but I'd better stay tonight to help to look after things. And I want to have a look at the sandfly, to see how she's getting on." Bobby went off to his room to pack, leaving the two lovers to say goodbye. A couple of hours later, seated alone with Marcia in a first-class compartment of the Bournemouth Express, it seemed to him that disaster at the hands of Visconti would have been almost better than this flat ending of his great adventure. What was the use of anything now, with the only woman he would ever care a button for lost to him as surely as that victory they had dumped overboard in the Bay of Hyalos? As he sat, gloomy and distrait, whilst Marcia, in her corner of the carriage, was turning over the pages of an illustrated weekly and seeming to have forgotten for a moment his existence, he went over again in his mind the whole expedition: Genoa and the Greek Bay, the salving of the marbles, Visconti and Pirelli, and the voyage home. It was all like a dream, the happiest dream, and it was over and done with forever. His gloom and depression seemed to have communicated themselves to the girl. Even when the moment for parting came at Victoria, it did not help things much in the way of cheerfulness. "I'll come round and see you at the office," said Bobby. "I expect you won't be settled down for a day or two, and I don't expect I'll hear anything from Behrens yet. When he does write, and if by any chance that cheque comes along, I am quite determined—" "Well, no matter. We will talk the matter over then." He closed the taxicab door on her and gave directions to the driver. A little white hand, just stripped of its glove, came out of the window, and he took it in his. Then, as the cab drove away, he turned to see after his luggage. Chapter 34. The End. It was in his rooms that night, after supper, and comfortably seated before the fire, that Bobby's troubles began. Common sense whispered into his ear. "She will never know now that you cared for her, really. Bother Sam Hackett and her engagement to him. You should have told her in the train or at the station. Instead of that, you sat dumb as a fish, sulking. And who's Sam Hackett, anyhow, that she should care for him more than for you? He's a nice fellow enough. But look at him. He has neither good looks nor anything else. Is it too late to speak to her now? Yes, it's too late. These things can only be done on the spur of the moment. You had your chance in the train, and it's gone. Imagine calling now at the office in cold blood and saying, 'I'm awfully sorry, but I forgot to tell you something I ought to have told you before.'" He got up and paced the room. Next morning brought him all sorts of work that had to be attended to, letters that had accumulated during his absence, and bills that had to be paid. His bank balance was low. The time spent on the expedition had been entirely unproductive in work or money. Unless Behrens paid him that promised cheque soon, he would be in a very difficult position. He had determined to call on Marcia, but not before that cheque arrived. He would take it with him and insist on her receiving her share of it. Anyhow, it would be something to call about. But would it ever arrive? He asked himself this question on the morning following, when the post brought him only a book catalogue and a typewriting agency's circular. Was Behrens to be trusted? Behrens at Poole had exhibited a new side to his character, the purely business side. The way he had gone over the accounts, his grumble at the expense incurred at Genoa over stores, his refusal to sell the Lorna Doone at a cheap price, when, surely, out of gratitude he might have made Sam a present of her, all these things came back to Bobby, together with a certain coldness in the old man's manner now that everything was over and his ends secured. Behrens, now that he had used the adventurers, seemed anxious to get rid of them all, so it seemed to Bobby, and there was no legal hold upon him, no contract, nothing. On the morning of the third day, when the post had brought him nothing, not even a book catalogue, Bobby made up his mind to call on Behrens. Behrens, by this time, in the superheated atmosphere of Mr. Lestrange's imagination, had turned into a figure almost resembling a rogue. He would have it out with Behrens and stand no nonsense. He was telling himself this, whilst putting on his overcoat, when a knock came at the door and the housemaid entered with a telegram. It was from Behrens and ran, "Please see me either today or tomorrow." Half an hour later he was in Museum Street. He dismissed his cab and entered the shop, where a young man was on guard, a foreign-looking individual, who was engaged at a side table making a copy of a catalogue. This was Fernandez, Behrens' assistant, the man who had brought the lorry down to Poole for the conveyance back to town of the Hyalos marbles. Fernandez said that his master was in and was about to leave the shop to fetch him when, gliding amongst the antiques and past a Japanese warrior in steel armor, Behrens himself came. He wore his skull cap, and he was smoking a cigarette through a long amber tube. Seeing who the visitor was, he came forward. Then, taking Bobby by the arm, he led the way through the back shop and upstairs to the sitting room on the first floor. "Well," said Behrens, "you have come? That is good, and now we can talk business. Take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Yes, I have got the things to London safe and sound, and I spent all yesterday in forming an estimate of their value. A difficult business, Mr. Lestrange, even for me. A business so difficult that I have determined to call in to my help, not now but at some future time, no less a person than Monsieur Claudin Paris. I wish to be exact in my valuation. There is no use in talking vaguely of thousands of pounds. I wish to be exact. But till I arrive at some settled figure, I have determined to offer you 20. Bobby felt as though someone had hit him on the head with a hammer. £20 till Behrens arrived at some settled figure. "Thank you," said he. "I would prefer to make them a present to you." Behrens looked at him in astonishment. "I do not know what is the matter with you all," he said. "I think you must all be a little mad. First Mr. Hackett, he wants nothing. Then Marcia Hare, she wants nothing. Then Mr. Lestrange, he wants nothing. Are you so rich, then, as to turn £20,000 away from you as though they were 20 pence? 20,000? Cried Bobby. Whilst he had been thinking in pounds, Behrens had been thinking in thousands. Then he explained, and the old man laughed, made him sit down again, and went on. Yes, Mr. Lestrange, 20,000. Probably it will be more later on, but that much I can assure you of. The cheque is already made out. Here it is. He rose and went to a desk and took out a cheque. Bobby, taking it in his hands, looked at it, feeling like a man in a dream. It was an extraordinary sensation, holding that slip of paper which was absolutely his and which represented a fortune. £20,000. Many a man labours a lifetime without making that amount, or, making it, has to spend it in outgoing expenses, so that the end of his life finds him as poor as the beginning. "It's good of you," was all he could find to say, as he folded the cheque in three and placed it in his pocket-book. "No," said Behrens. "It is only business. But that cheque is no use to you without a piece of advice. Draw that money and open an account with it at the same bank. It's one of the best in the world. Then ask them to invest it for you through their brokers in good sound securities. Then go on with whatever work you have taken up. A man of your age has no right to live on the interest of his money." "I will do what you say," replied Bobby, "when I have seen Marcia Hare, and if she still refuses to take anything." The old fellow grinned. "Go on then and see her," said he, taking Bobby by the arm and leading him down just as he had led him up. "See her and tell her old Behrens has not forgotten her. Ah, that is a girl. Do you know, Mr. Lestrange, why she will not take any money from this business? Well, I will tell you what is in my thoughts. Isaac was her lover, as you know, and this expedition would have been his had he lived. She would not make money out of it on that account. That is what I think. It is a beautiful thought, more beautiful even than the Aphrodite of Hyllos. Well, may she be happy yet with some man worthy of her. That is what I pray. Yes, come and see me again. I am always glad to see you, Mr. Lestrange, and her." He showed Bobby into the street. Here the huge cheque in the young man's pocket hit him again with the force of its eloquence. That vulgarism, money talks, expresses more than at first hearing it seems to do. The cheque in his pocket was telling him that Museum Street was completely changed, that though the houses were still the same, the atmosphere was different, that though it seemed to be leading him into New Oxford Street, it was in reality leading him into a new life. It was only 5 minutes to 11, so he determined to walk to Fleet Street. He was wise in this, for the walk gave him time to think, and freedom of mind to grasp and hold for a brief space the sense of fortune. Never again, no matter what his success might be, would he feel like that. He chose to go by way of St. Martin's Lane, and then along the Strand, taking the same road as on that morning of his first visit to Marcia, and, just as on that morning, he paused at the gunsmith's window to look at the guns and rifles. And, just as on that morning, his heart went out to them. these very gods who preside over the destinies of their holders and handlers and the lives of the beasts of the jungle and the plain. On that first day, they had made the world of literature seem a sick sort of place beside the world of adventure. Since then, he had tested the latter and knew the truth. Once he had settled up the business of this check with Marcia, he would write no more. He would seek the open spaces, where a man might breathe freely untrammeled by the thing we call civilization, and free of the disease we call love. Again he saw the guns fading and giving place to the ghostly forms of the beasts of the jungle and the wilderness, whilst the sound of the strand turned to the far-off roar of the tiger and the torrent. Then he turned and broke the spell and passed on his way to White Lion Court. Yes, Miss Hare was in, and would he wait, as she was engaged for a moment? It was just the same as on that first morning, the little waiting room, the table with the papers laid out on it, the far-off clicking of typewriters, everything, just the same as though nothing had happened and the whole expedition had been a dream. Then he was shown into Marcia's room, and here again everything was just the same, even to the girl at the desk table who rose to greet him, offered him a seat, and retook her place at the table. "I've got the check," said Bobby, after they had spoken a few words. "Behrens kept me waiting, or I'd have called before. It's 20,000. 20,000 pounds? Yes, 20,000. There may be more to come when he's had the opinion of another expert on the things, but anyhow, it's not bad." He fumbled in his pocket and produced the check, which he handed to the girl, who looked at it, holding it for a moment, and then returning it to him. He rose and placed it on the desk, and then sat down again. "Half of that is yours," said he. "It is. I won't touch it unless you take your share. Sam refused anything, yet but for him and for you, we'd never have pulled the business through. If you won't have it yourself, you've got to make him take it." "But how am I to make him?" asked she. "I have no power over Mr. Hackett." "Oh, yes, you have. At least you will have. I've got to tell you that I couldn't help hearing what you said to him that night at the inn. I only heard a word, but it was enough. It told me everything." "Word? At the inn? What on earth do you mean?" "That you are engaged to him." "Me? Engaged to Mr. Hackett?" Marcia looked at him as though she were doubtful as to his reason. Then a new light came into her eyes, and across her face the ghost of a smile. "Oh, I see now what you mean. I remember what he said that night." She laughed. "It was about Violet he was speaking." "Violet?" "My sister. He was engaged to her, and they broke it off. It was the stupidest thing. That is what made him take to that horrid life all alone on a yacht. He really loved her just as she loves him. But I have made it all right now, and they are together again." Before this news, Bobby sat stricken dumb. He saw now the whole mystery of Sam and Marcia in its proper light, the reason they had met in the first instance as strangers, yet evidently knowing one another. The reason Sam, the broken-hearted, had lapsed from sobriety at Genoa and Hyalos. The whole business, and his own ghastly stupidity in flying to a wrong conclusion. Then he leaned forward and took Marcia by the hands. She had loved him from the very first moment when he had come blundering into the office and into her life. She told him so presently, speaking in a calm, level voice, with a trace in her eyes of that strange remoteness which the sculptor had caught in the eyes of the Aphrodite of Hyllos. "Behrens is still alive. When he is dead, the artistic world will, no doubt, receive the shock of its life, and Hyllos will perhaps deliver up, from the Street of Hermes and the Street of the Winds, treasures more wonderful than the Aphrodite or the ruins of the Statue of Victory. Even before that, if you have the money and the spirit of adventure and the time to hunt, for the location which I have given you is quite unreliable, you may forestall him and cover yourself with laurels, or more likely, get yourself into a Greek prison. But you will get neither Robert Lestrange nor Samuel Hackett to assist you in the business. They are two happily married men in an age strangely unproductive of happy marriages." The end.